I still remember the air that afternoon. Thick, heavy, the kind that makes your skin feel too tight. My mother had insisted on a family discussion. She said it with that practiced calm that always meant bad news disguised as reason. Everyone was already seated when I walked in. My father in his usual armchair, legs crossed, glasses perched low. My sister on the couch beside him, scrolling through her phone like she was too busy to care. I didn't sit right away. I just asked, "What's going on?" My mother smiled, the way she does when she's nervous. "We've been talking about the future of this house," she began, "and your father and I have made a decision." Something in her voice made my stomach twist. I laughed lightly, trying to cut the tension. "You're not selling it, are you?" My father cleared his throat. "No, we're giving it to your sister." The words didn't land at first. They just hung in the air, absurd, echoing like a bad joke that no one laughed at. I blinked, waiting for someone to correct him. When no one did, I said softly, "You mean, you're giving her a share?" He looked at me the way a teacher looks at a child who doesn't get the lesson. "No, the house will be transferred entirely in her name." "It makes sense. She's starting her own family. You're independent now." Independent. That word stung. I stared at the walls around us, the curtains I'd chosen, the plants I'd watered, the very floor I'd scrubbed after their dinners. Independent. As if being self-reliant meant I didn't deserve the roof I'd helped pay for. My sister finally put her phone down. She smiled, lips curved in triumph. "It's not a big deal. You don't even like living here anymore." A flash of heat shot up my neck. "I don't like living where I'm not respected," I said. My voice cracked at the edges, and I hated that it did. My mother sighed. "Don't make this dramatic. You know your sister has always dreamed of owning a house." "And I haven't?" I wanted to scream. I'd worked double shifts when Dad lost his job, delayed my own apartment hunt to help with the mortgage, handled their bills when they forgot. But those things never counted because I was the responsible one. The one who didn't need praise or promises. Relatives who'd been quietly sitting in corners shifted uncomfortably. My aunt tried to smile. "They're just trying to be fair, dear." Fair. That word was poison. How is it fair to give her everything? My father's tone sharpened. "You've had opportunities she hasn't. You went to university, you have a good job. She needs stability." I could feel my heart pounding like it wanted out of my chest. "This isn't about stability. It's about favoritism, like always." My sister rolled her eyes. "God, you're so ungrateful. You act like you built this house." Her words hit something raw. Maybe I did act like that because I had built it, in every invisible way. The nights I came home after midnight and still cleaned, the money I slipped under bills to keep the lights on, the meals I cooked when Mom was too tired. I looked at my parents. Really looked. My mother avoided my eyes. My father's face was stone. The silence felt like betrayal pressed into the air. Finally, I whispered, "So that's it? You're just giving her my home?" My father adjusted his glasses. "It was never yours." The room spun for a moment. I wanted to laugh, to shout, to disappear. Instead, I nodded slowly, pretending calm. "Understood." I walked to the window, stared at the yard I'd planted roses in. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the walls gold. A cruel kind of beauty. Behind me, I heard my sister giggle softly, and my mother say something about family unity. I didn't turn around. I couldn't, because in that moment, something inside me broke and reformed all at once. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a stage, and I was the fool who thought she was part of the story. It was the moment I realized I was a guest in my own home. When I was younger, I used to think love had to be earned. Maybe that's why I tried so hard to be the good daughter. Quiet, responsible, never causing trouble. My sister, on the other hand, was the storm. She could do no wrong, even when she did. If she forgot to come home for dinner, my parents said she was busy. If I forgot, they said I was disrespectful. I learned early that fairness didn't live in our house. I can still remember one birthday. Mine, actually. I was turning 16. My mother spent the morning helping my sister pick an outfit for her friend's party. She forgot to wish me until evening when Dad reminded her. "Oh, right," she said. "Happy birthday, sweetie," like it was a chore she'd almost crossed off her list. My sister got home late that night, smelling like perfume and laughter, and my parents fussed over her like she was returning from war. I just sat there with the half-eaten cake I'd bought myself. That moment stayed with me. Not because it was cruel, but because it was normal. Years later, when things got hard, I still chose them. When Dad lost his job, I worked extra shifts at the diner. When Mom got sick, I moved back home to help. My sister sent flowers once. They wilted before she called again. But somehow I was always too intense, too sensitive, too serious. They said it like it was a flaw, like caring too much was something I should fix. The house itself became my project, my comfort. Every wall, every corner had my fingerprints. I was the one who repainted the faded kitchen cabinets, replaced the squeaky hinges, planted the marigolds by the front gate. I remember Dad saying, "You don't have to do all that," but he never stopped me either. Maybe because somewhere inside I hoped they'd finally see me. Not just as the reliable one, but as their daughter, too. My sister only showed up when there was something to celebrate. New Year's, birthdays, her promotions. She'd bring gifts wrapped in shiny paper and soak up everyone's attention like sunlight. I'd stand at the sink, washing dishes, listening to her stories about city life, while Mom and Dad beamed with pride. They never asked how my day had been. Maybe they thought they already knew. Predictable, boring, safe. Sometimes I'd overhear them talking about her in the kitchen. "She's just like me," Mom would say proudly. "She has her father's charm," Dad would add. Then, in that same breath, one of them would sigh and say, "If only your sister learned to loosen up like her." I didn't even know what that meant. Loosen up? Be careless? Be loved despite it? It wasn't until I got older that I realized love in our family wasn't unconditional. It was convenient. My sister was the joy they wanted to show the world. I was the stability they took for granted. Every sacrifice I made, they turned into an expectation. I thought one day they'd notice, but they never did. I was always the shadow behind her spotlight. There were nights I'd sit in the living room after everyone went to bed, just staring at the photos on the wall. Her graduation picture hung right in the center. Mine was smaller, pushed to the side near the hallway. I used to wonder if it was intentional. It probably wasn't, but that's how neglect works. It hides behind things that look unimportant. Even after all those years, I still tried. I cooked her favorite meals when she visited, gave her my old clothes when she complained about money, even covered for her when she forgot Mom's medication. But no matter what I did, it was never enough to change how they saw us. Looking back now, I think that's what hurts most. Not the house, not the inheritance, but the quiet truth that I was never chosen. I was needed, yes, but never wanted. And maybe that's why, when they announced the decision about the house, it didn't come out of nowhere. It was the final confirmation of something I'd always known but never wanted to admit. I was never their favorite. I was just the one who stayed. That night, as I lay awake in my old room, I realized how deep that loneliness ran. It wasn't about losing the house. It was about realizing that no one in it had ever truly seen me. The next morning, the air in the house felt strange, heavy, like the silence before a storm. Mom had set the dining table, but instead of breakfast, there were papers neatly stacked in the middle. My sister sat there, arms folded, trying to hide her smirk. Dad cleared his throat, his tone clipped and businesslike. "We've decided to make it official," he said, sliding the documents toward me. "It's just paperwork. For fairness. For fairness." The word twisted in my chest like a knife. I glanced at the bold letters at the top of the page. Transfer of ownership. My name was nowhere on it. The address printed there was my home, the one I'd poured years of my life into. My hands trembled as I picked it up. "What is this?" I asked, though I already knew. Dad didn't look at me when he answered. "You've had plenty of help from us over the years," he said. "Your sister hasn't. It's only right she gets her share." "My share?" I repeated, choking on the words. "You mean my life, my home. The place I've been maintaining, paying for, taking care of." Mom sighed like she was tired of my dramatics. "You always take things so personally. This isn't about who loves who more. It's about what's fair." I wanted to laugh, but the sound that came out was closer to a sob. My sister picked up her mug, blowing on her coffee with exaggerated calm. "Come on, don't make this a big deal," she said. "It's just property, just property. The words hit me like a slap. I could see the faint shimmer of triumph in her eyes, the kind of quiet satisfaction of someone who finally got everything she believed she deserved. Dad pushed the papers closer. "Just sign it," he said firmly. "It's already done. You'll still live here for now if you want, but the deed will be in her name." I stared at the pen lying across the table. My fingers curled into fists. "No," I said softly. "I'm not signing anything." He looked at me then, his jaw tight. "You don't have a choice." "It's been notarized." The room spun. I felt heat rising in my face as I tried to process what he was saying. "You did this without me?" I asked. "Behind my back?" Mom reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Sweetheart," she began. "We knew you'd overreact." "Overreact?" My voice cracked. "You took the only thing I've ever had, the only thing that was mine, and you call this fairness?" My sister leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs. "You act like you built this house yourself," she said. "You've just been living here rent-free for years. Maybe it's time for you to grow up." Something inside me snapped. "Rent-free?" I hissed. "Who do you think paid the mortgage when Dad lost his job? Who covered Mom's medical bills? Who fixed the roof, the plumbing, the wiring, while you were off pretending to be important?" The silence that followed was suffocating. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. But no one said a word in my defense. Not Mom, not Dad, certainly not her. I waited, foolishly, for one of them to stop her, to tell her she was being cruel. But they just sat there, blank-faced, like strangers. I stood up so fast the chair screeched across the floor. My throat felt raw, my chest tight with something between rage and heartbreak. "You've already made your choice," I said. "Don't expect me to smile and pretend it's fine." Dad's voice followed me as I turned toward the door. "We did what was right," he said flatly. "You'll understand one day." I spun back, tears burning my eyes. "No," I said. "One day, you'll understand what you've lost." Then I walked out, barefoot, without my coat, the evening air cutting through me like glass. The cold felt almost good against my skin, something sharp and real after all that falseness. Behind me I could still hear faint voices, laughter maybe, or the clinking of cups, as if nothing had just shattered. I stopped at the gate and turned back for a moment. The windows glowed warm and golden, like the house itself was alive, breathing without me. I swallowed hard, my breath turning to mist in the cold night air. My hands were shaking, but my voice, when it came, was steady, low. "Certain this isn't over?" Then I walked into the darkness, leaving behind the house that had never truly been mine, but no longer belonged to them either, not in the way they thought. It had only been a few days since that night, but the silence between us had already hardened into something solid. When I finally gathered the courage to come back, the house looked different. Even from the outside, I could tell. The marigolds I'd planted by the gate were gone, replaced by some manicured white roses that didn't belong. I stepped inside, and my heart sank. My sister was standing in the living room, paint roller in hand, humming like she owned the place. The soft beige walls I had chosen, the ones I spent nights perfecting, were now a sterile shade of white. Boxes lined the floor, filled with things I hadn't packed. My childhood photo albums, my books, even the embroidered cushions Mom once said she loved. "Oh, hey," my sister said, barely looking up. I figured I'd start redecorating. The old style felt so outdated. She laughed softly as if it were a joke, but I heard the cruelty hiding under it. My eyes landed on the family photo that used to hang by the staircase, the one where I was holding our dog, and Mom had her hand on my shoulder. It wasn't there anymore. The wall was empty, a pale rectangle where it used to be. "Where are my things?" I asked, though my voice barely made it past a whisper. "In your room," she replied. "Or what's left of it. I'm turning it into a guest space. Don't worry, I saved your stuff. I'm not heartless." The way she said it, smug, casual, dismissive, made my chest ache. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps echoing in what used to be my home. The air smelled like fresh paint and lemon cleaner, and yet beneath it, I could still smell my own memories dying. When I opened the door to my room, I froze. The bed was pushed aside. The curtains were gone. The walls were half covered in new wallpaper, floral, loud, nothing like me. My drawers were empty, my clothes folded in boxes by the door. On the dresser, a photo of me as a child had been replaced by one of her, smiling, perfect, triumphant. Mom appeared in the doorway behind me, holding a tray of tea she clearly didn't want to offer. "She's just trying to make it hers," she said quietly. "Don't make this harder than it already is." Her voice was kind, but her eyes didn't meet mine. She couldn't even look at me. "Harder for who?" I asked. "For her? Or for you?" She didn't answer. She just placed the tray down, gave me a weak smile, and left. I could hear my sister in the next room laughing with Dad, asking about curtains and lighting. It was like I was invisible. Every sound in the house felt wrong. Every wall, every smell, every object was shifting, erasing me piece by piece. I wanted to scream, to demand they stop, but something in me had already gone quiet. That's the thing about heartbreak. Sometimes it doesn't explode. Sometimes it just folds you in half until you disappear. I sat on the bare floor, staring at the walls I once decorated with my dreams, my late-night notes, the memories of who I thought I was in this house. I ran my fingers along a mark on the wall, the faint outline of where my bookshelf used to be. It felt like touching a ghost. Dad appeared at the door next, his tone clipped. "Don't make this harder," he said, echoing Mom's words. "You knew this was coming. It's time to move forward. Move forward." As if I hadn't spent my entire life holding everyone together while they built a future without me. I nodded, because arguing felt pointless now, so I packed my things silently. One box, then another. My hands moved automatically, wrapping pieces of my past in newspaper, labeling boxes I didn't even know where I'd take. When I closed the final box, I took one last look around. The room was empty, stripped of color, stripped of meaning. It wasn't mine anymore. Maybe it never was. As I carried the boxes out to my car, my sister called from behind me. "Don't forget to drop off your keys." Her voice was cheerful, like this was just another one of her wins. I didn't look back. I couldn't. But as I drove away, the reflection of the house in my rearview mirror blurred. Not from distance, but from tears I refused to let fall. The couch smelled faintly of detergent and someone else's life. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't mine, just like everything else lately. My friend Mia had insisted I stay as long as I needed. I told her I'd be fine in a week. I didn't believe it, and neither did she. The first few nights I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that house, my house, being painted over, piece by piece. I'd wake up in a sweat, heart pounding, as if I'd been robbed and the thief had left the door wide open. One night I broke. I sat on the couch, knees pulled to my chest, and finally let it out, the sobs I'd been choking down since that family meeting. It wasn't just the house. It was years of being unseen, of doing everything right and still being the disposable one. Mia came out of her room quietly, holding 2 mugs of tea. "You don't deserve this," she said, sitting beside me. "You've done too much for them to just throw you out like that." Her words stung, not because they weren't true, but because I'd spent my whole life pretending they weren't. I wiped my eyes, voice hoarse. "I paid for half that mortgage, Mia, maybe more. They said it was their house, but I helped build it. I worked overtime, skipped vacations, poured everything into that place." "Then prove it," she said simply. At first I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "Prove it? How? They've already signed the papers." "Maybe. But if you have proof you contributed, that changes everything." Her tone shifted something in me. I hadn't felt power in weeks, not since the night I left. But suddenly there was a flicker, a pulse of anger sharper than grief. After she went to bed, I opened my laptop. I started digging, through old emails, bank statements, anything that could remind me of who actually paid for that house. For hours, I scrolled through years of transactions, deposits, utility bills, repair invoices. Every line felt like a breadcrumb leading back to the truth. Then, buried deep in my inbox, I found it, an old email from the bank. The subject line read, "Initial mortgage payment confirmation." My breath caught. The document attached was from over a decade ago, showing my transfer for the down payment, my money. Not my parents, not my sisters, Mine. I stared at the screen, my reflection faint in the glow of the monitor. It hit me like lightning. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't exaggerating. I had been the backbone of that home from the start, and they erased me. My chest tightened, not from sadness this time, but from fury wrapped in clarity. The next morning, Mia found me still awake, eyes red but determined. "You found something," she said. I turned the laptop toward her. "My name's right there. They said I never contributed. They lied." Mia smiled, not the comforting kind, but the proud, dangerous kind. "Then it's time they find out who they messed with." Her words echoed in my head all day. For the first time since leaving, I didn't feel powerless. I wasn't just the daughter they could guilt into silence, or the sister they could erase with a stroke of a pen. I had proof, and with it, a plan began to take shape. I called in sick to work that day, not because I couldn't function, but because I finally had something better to do. I spent hours printing documents, organizing evidence, and noting every expense that tied me to that property. Each page I stacked felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. By the time the sun set, the coffee table was buried under papers. My exhaustion was gone, replaced by an eerie calm. I'd spent years begging for fairness. Now I'd settle for justice. As I closed my laptop, I whispered to the empty room. "They took my home. Now I'll take back my story." And for the first time in weeks, I fell asleep, not on a stranger's couch, but on the edge of a plan that finally felt like mine. The law office was tucked between a bakery and a hardware store, an odd place for something that could change my life. The bell chimed softly as I walked in, clutching a worn folder against my chest. My palms were damp, my throat dry. I hadn't told anyone I was coming, not even Mia. Some things needed to stay quiet until they were ready to roar. The lawyer's name was Daniel. Middle-aged, calm, the kind of man who spoke in complete sentences and waited a beat before answering. He didn't rush me. He listened. That alone felt like a kindness I hadn't had in months. "So," he said after I'd explained everything, "you're saying you contributed financially to a property now legally under your parents' name?" I nodded. I didn't just contribute. I made the first payments. I handled repairs, taxes, even the insurance at times. It wasn't charity, it was family. I just trusted them. Daniel leaned back, steepling his fingers. "And now they've transferred ownership to your sister." "Yes." The word burned on the way out. He studied me for a moment, then opened my folder. I'd spent nights assembling it. Receipts, email confirmations, bank statements, printouts. It looked unimpressive, but each page was a piece of my history. When he finished flipping through, he nodded slowly. "This is strong. You have proof of contribution, verifiable payments tied directly to the property account. That gives you what's called equitable interest. Legally, it means you can claim partial ownership, especially since your payments weren't gifts and you lived there." I blinked, trying to process. "So I have a case?" "You do," he said simply. "It might not be clean or easy, but you have ground to stand on. If you stay quiet, they'll assume you've accepted it. But if you act carefully, you can challenge the transfer. At the very least, you can force recognition of your investment." His words landed like steady thunder. I'd spent weeks feeling erased, and now I had someone confirming I wasn't crazy. I wasn't powerless. Still, my stomach twisted. "I don't want to start a war," I admitted. "I just want the truth to count for something." Daniel gave a faint smile. "Then let it. But remember, silence only works when it's strategic, not submissive. Decide what kind of quiet you want to keep." That sentence stayed with me. What kind of quiet do I want to keep? I thanked him, gathered my papers, and stepped back into the sunlight. The city felt louder now, like it had been holding its breath with me. I walked slowly, thinking, if I stormed back into that house, I'd lose the upper hand. They'd twist it into hysteria, like they always did. But if I stayed quiet, methodical, they'd never see it coming. So I made my silence sharp. Over the next few weeks, I started collecting everything I could. Old messages from Mom thanking me for covering utility bills. Bank transfers labeled Home Loan Assist. Photos of the renovations I'd paid for. New flooring, the roof I'd replaced during that brutal winter when Dad was between jobs. I moved like a ghost. No calls, no confrontations. I'd show up at my parents' place sometimes just to pick up old mail or act casual, pretending to have accepted everything. My sister would gloat, showing off new furniture, hinting about how she was finally modernizing the house. I smiled through it. It killed me too, but I did. Inside, though, I was memorizing every detail. Invoices left on the counter, the new deed framed in the hallway, the smug tilt in her voice when she said, "my house." Every word, every signature, every receipt was ammunition. At night, I'd sit on Mia's couch with my laptop glowing in the dark, categorizing files, labeling folders. Mortgage, insurance, property tax, maintenance, all cross-referenced. Each click was a heartbeat, steady and determined. I remembered something Daniel said near the end of our meeting. Documentation is louder than any argument. You don't need to shout when the truth is written down. That became my mantra. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to cry. I just needed proof. And patience. One evening, as I was organizing a particularly old statement, I noticed something I'd missed before. A joint payment receipt, one that listed my name and my father's, dated before the final mortgage transfer. My hands shook as I held it up. That small piece of paper meant the narrative wasn't entirely theirs. Legally, the ownership transfer might be flawed. I exhaled slowly, almost afraid to believe it. The next morning, I printed duplicates of everything and stored them in a plain manila envelope. Then I made a backup drive and hid it under the couch cushion. No one would suspect. Not yet. Mia caught me one night as I was sealing the envelope. "You're planning something," she said, crossing her arms. "Not yet," I replied, slipping the documents into my bag. "Right now, I'm just remembering everything they forgot." That night, as I turned off the lights and sat in the dark, I felt a strange calm settle in. The kind that comes before a storm. My family thought they'd silenced me, but they didn't realize. Silence can also be the sound of preparation. And I was preparing. The invitation arrived wrapped in gold foil, as if irony had a sense of humor. My sister was hosting a housewarming celebration, complete with catered dinner, live music, and a champagne tower tall enough to touch the ceiling I once painted myself. The envelope smelled faintly of her perfume, the same scent she used to steal from me in high school. For a moment, I considered tearing it in half. But then I realized this wasn't an invitation. It was a test, a declaration of her new power. And if she wanted me to feel small, she'd be disappointed. I wasn't the same woman who left that house crying into the cold night. So I decided to attend, not as the broken daughter or the humiliated sister, but as a guest of my own rebirth. When the evening came, I dressed deliberately. A sleek black dress, subtle jewelry, hair pinned just so. Not glamorous, but dignified, like someone who didn't need to prove anything. Mia tried to talk me out of going, but I smiled. "I just want to see what I built," I said. And I meant it. The house glowed from the driveway, every light blazing, every window sparkling. It was strange, how something so familiar could now feel like a stranger wearing my skin. Music spilled out from inside, and laughter floated through the open doors. When I stepped in, the chatter dimmed slightly. Just for a second, people glanced, recognizing me. The other daughter, the one who'd vanished after the family transfer. My sister's smile froze when she saw me. For a heartbeat, I thought she might tell me to leave. Instead, she straightened, masking surprise with charm. "Well," she said, voice dripping with false sweetness. "Didn't expect you to come," I smiled back. "It's a beautiful housewarming." I had to see what all the fuss was about. She blinked, just once, then gestured toward the guests. "Make yourself at home." I almost laughed at the words. At home. As the evening unfolded, I moved through the rooms like a ghost haunting her own past. The dining table where I'd spent years serving dinners was now covered in crystal and flowers. The living room walls were repainted, white, sterile, soulless. Every sign of me had been scrubbed out, and yet I could still feel the traces. I caught snippets of conversation, her bragging about renovations, her job promotion, her independent success. The guests nodded politely, though a few glanced at me curiously. perhaps sensing something unsaid. Dad made an appearance, stiff and proud, talking to the neighbors about how proud he was of his girls. Mom flitted around nervously, avoiding my gaze. I kept my expression calm, serene even. I wasn't there to argue. I was there to remember. At one point, I drifted toward the hallway, toward that doorway. The one leading to my old room. My fingers brushed the frame unconsciously, feeling the smooth grain beneath the paint. I remembered sanding that wood myself one summer when we couldn't afford a contractor. The smell of sawdust, the ache in my hands, the satisfaction of creating something solid from nothing. Now it gleamed with expensive polish. I ran my thumb across it and whispered under my breath so soft no one could hear. Enjoy it while you can. It wasn't anger in my voice, not anymore. It was promise. Later, my sister raised a toast in front of everyone, thanking our parents for making her dream come true. She didn't mention me, of course. I lifted my glass anyway, meeting her eyes from across the room. She faltered for a split second, her voice catching, her smile tightening. It was subtle, but I saw it. The power had shifted. She felt it, even if she didn't understand why. A few guests approached me throughout the night, offering small talk, curiosity veiled as kindness. "You must be proud of your sister," one of them said. "I am," I replied smoothly. "She's finally getting to enjoy the home we all worked so hard for." The way the woman blinked, the slight confusion, was all the satisfaction I needed. The truth had entered the room, even if no one realized it yet. As I left later that night, I paused at the front door again. My sister stood near the foyer, watching me, her champagne glass trembling slightly. "Leaving so soon?" she asked. "Yes," I said, slipping on my coat. "Just wanted to stop by and congratulate you." I smiled. Calm, polite, devastating. "You've really made it yours." Her eyes narrowed just enough to betray unease. I stepped outside into the cool air, the night sharp with the scent of jasmine and new beginnings. As I looked back at the glowing windows, I didn't feel loss anymore, just certainty. That house may have been hers for now, on paper, in title, in name, but deep down, the foundation still belonged to me. And soon, everyone would know it. It started with a phone call I didn't answer, 3 missed calls from my father. Then 2 from my mother, then 1 from an unknown number, local, persistent. I watched them flash on my screen from the cafe table, the aroma of bitter coffee rising between me and the past. I knew before I listened to the voicemail that something had finally cracked. When I played the message, his voice was furious, shaking. "What did you do? The bank just sent us a notice. They froze the title transfer. You've gone too far this time." I almost smiled. Not because I wanted revenge, but because the wheel had finally turned. The letter from the bank, that's what everyone would call it later, arrived in a plain white envelope. No drama, no warning, but inside it was chaos. The bank had flagged the property's ownership due to a dispute over original payments. My payments. The system had traced back the earliest mortgage installments to my personal account, the very ones I had quietly made when my father's business nearly collapsed years ago. Those transactions, forgotten, unacknowledged, buried, were now resurrected proof that the house was never fully theirs to give away. Mia had been right. The universe doesn't always need noise to bring justice. Sometimes it just needs receipts. Within hours, my phone buzzed nonstop. My mother's text swung between guilt and panic. "Please come talk to your father. He's furious. We didn't know this would happen." Then, a new message from my sister. "What are you playing at?" "You're ruining everything for me." I read it twice, then replied simply, "I'm not ruining anything. I'm reclaiming what's mine." Minutes later, my father finally got through. His voice was sharp, slicing through the silence. "You went to the bank? You told them lies about paying for the house?" "No lies," I said evenly. "Just documentation. The payments were mine. The records proved it. You're tearing this family apart," he thundered. I closed my eyes, steadying my breath. "No, Dad. You did that when you decided I didn't belong." For the first time, he didn't have an answer. Word spread quickly. My sister's new homeowner status, the pride of the neighborhood, suddenly became the subject of gossip. The party guests who had toasted her were now whispering behind her back, questioning how a house transfer could be frozen weeks after celebration. She tried to handle it gracefully at first, calling it a clerical mistake, but panic leaked through her perfect exterior. When the bank requested a formal review meeting, her confidence shattered. And then came the real blow. Her fiancé called me. "You've made a huge mistake," he snapped, voice tight with anger. "Do you realize what you've done? The property's under review. The mortgage could default. I could sue for defamation and financial interference." I let him rant until he ran out of breath. Then, I said quietly, "You should probably talk to your lawyer before threatening someone who still has her name on the original payment records." Silence. Then the line went dead. By evening, I heard from Mia that my sister's fiancé had stormed out after a screaming match. Neighbors reported seeing him peel out of the driveway in his car. The engagement ring, apparently, was left on the kitchen counter. I sat by the window that night, watching rain streak the glass. I should have felt triumphant, but I didn't. The victory didn't taste sweet. It tasted necessary. My parents were now fractured between denial and regret. My sister, stripped of her pedestal, was finally facing the weight of her entitlement. The house, once their symbol of control, had become a battlefield marked by my silent defiance. As thunder rolled in the distance, my phone lit up again. A message from my lawyer. They'll try to settle. "Don't say yes too fast." I typed back one sentence before turning off my phone for the night. "Don't worry, this isn't over yet." The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood, like the past refusing to die. I sat at the plaintiff's table, palms pressed flat against my skirt to hide the trembling. My lawyer, Ms. Hale, leaned toward me, her voice low and steady. "Remember," she whispered, "we don't need theatrics. The truth will do the heavy lifting today." Across the aisle, my sister looked immaculate. Perfectly styled hair, pearl earrings, and that same smug calm she'd worn the day our parents gave her my house. My parents sat behind her, avoiding my eyes, their faces stiff masks of discomfort. They didn't look at me as their daughter anymore, only as the problem who had dragged family business into public view. When the judge entered, everyone stood. My heart pounded like a drum in my chest. I wasn't nervous about losing. I was nervous about finally being seen. Ms. Hale began the opening statement. "This isn't about greed. This is about recognition, the acknowledgement of years of contributions erased under the guise of favoritism and control." Her tone was sharp, controlled. "We intend to prove that my client, the plaintiff, made significant financial and material investments into the property long before it was transferred. Investments that make her a legal co-owner under equitable interest." My sister rolled her eyes dramatically. I stared at the table, refusing to react. Then came the evidence. Ms. Hale called me to the stand. My legs felt weak as I walked up, swearing the oath with a hand that barely stopped shaking. When she asked the first question, her voice softened. "Tell the court how you came to live in that house." I took a breath. It was the house I grew up in. When my father's business struggled, I started paying the mortgage. I didn't do it for ownership. I did it because I didn't want us to lose our home. And did anyone acknowledge those payments? I gave a small, bitter smile. Not until the bank froze the title. Gasps rippled quietly through the spectators. My sister fidgeted, pretending not to hear. Ms. Hale projected the first set of documents, bank transfers, receipts, all marked with my account number. "These payments total over 40% of the home's principal cost," she said firmly, "made consistently over 5 years. The defense lawyer stood. "Your Honor, we don't deny she contributed, but those payments were gifts. Family support, not ownership claims." Ms. Hale smiled like she'd been waiting for that. "Then why?" she said, stepping closer. "Were those gifts labeled under mortgage payment, property loan, DOPMIR 304B, directly into the lender's account?" The defense lawyer hesitated. The silence that followed felt electric. Next came the witnesses. Mia, my best friend, testified with quiet strength. She stayed with me when they kicked her out. I saw her bank records. She paid for the roof repairs, the new plumbing, everything. Then came an old neighbor, Mrs. Patel. She was always fixing something. Her sister only showed up for parties. Everyone in the neighborhood knew who really cared about that house. Each word felt like a brick, rebuilding what they'd tried to take. My sister's composure began to crack. She whispered furiously to her lawyer, her cheeks flushing. When it was her turn to testify, she walked to the stand with an exaggerated sigh. "This whole thing is ridiculous," she said. "My parents gave me the house because I'm the responsible one." "She's just jealous." "Responsible?" Ms. Hale's eyebrow arched. "Did you ever contribute financially to the property before it was gifted to you?" I helped with things," she stammered. "Groceries, maybe, sometimes." Ms. Hale waited. "Groceries, I see." She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit Exhibit G, renovation invoices from 2019 to 2022, totaling $14,800, paid solely by the plaintiff." My sister's face turned pale. My mother started quietly crying behind her. My father stared at the floor, jaw clenched. For the first time in years, they both looked small. Then the judge spoke, voice calm but firm. "I've reviewed the evidence thoroughly. The financial documentation, witness testimony, and recorded payments establish clear equitable interest. The property transfer, executed without acknowledgement of these contributions, was unjust." A hush fell over the room. The judge continued. "Therefore, this court rules that the property shall be restored under joint ownership between both sisters. Furthermore, the defendant is ordered to provide compensatory restitution for half the value of the plaintiff's verified investments." My breath caught. My sister's mouth fell open in disbelief. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, this can't be happening." The judge glanced at her briefly. "It is." Tears welled in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I stood there, silent, feeling the weight of years lift off my chest. For once, I wasn't the invisible daughter. My sister slumped in her chair, mascara streaking down her face. My parents looked on helplessly, confronted by the consequences of their favoritism, exposed before strangers. When the gavel struck, it echoed through the courtroom like thunder, final, irreversible. As people began to leave, I stayed seated for a moment longer, staring at the polished wood floors. They reflected my image faintly, like a ghost reclaiming her shape. My lawyer touched my arm. "You did well," she said softly. "You didn't have to yell to be heard." I nodded. My voice trembled. "I just wanted them to see the truth." As I walked out of the courthouse into the crisp afternoon light, flashes from reporters' cameras caught my sister's tear-streaked face behind me. She tried to call my name, but I kept walking. I didn't need to turn around. I'd already won back more than a house. I'd won back my dignity. The house felt smaller when I walked back in. Not because it had changed, but because I finally stood in it without needing anyone's permission to belong. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and dust, traces of my sister's brief reign. Boxes lined the hallway, half sealed and carelessly stacked. She was moving out. I didn't say anything as I passed her in the foyer. She avoided my eyes, clutching a photo frame wrapped in bubble wrap. It was the same photo she'd once removed of us as kids, smiling on this very porch. Now she couldn't even meet my gaze. I almost pitied her. Almost. My mother hovered near the staircase, her expression tight with shame. "We didn't mean for it to go this far," she murmured. "We just wanted peace in the family." I looked at her gently. "Peace doesn't come from silence, Mom. It comes from fairness." She nodded, her eyes glistening. I didn't need an apology anymore. I'd spent years begging for understanding. Now I finally understood myself. That was enough. In the living room, the same one where they'd announced the house transfer, sunlight poured through the windows, golden and soft. Dust motes floated lazily in the beams, spinning in circles like time itself was trying to reset. I stood there, letting the quiet settle around me. It was strange how silence could feel so full. For once, it didn't suffocate me. It soothed me. I walked over to the wall where the family portrait used to hang. A faint rectangle of lighter paint marked its absence. I traced the edges with my fingers and smiled, not in triumph, but in peace. This was never about the walls, I whispered to myself. It was about being seen. The house creaked as if it remembered. Later, when I stood by the front, Dorkinam, the one I had helped build, the one my sister had claimed and lost, she brushed past me with her final box. "You got what you wanted," she muttered. I didn't respond. Some victories didn't need words. She paused, waiting for a reaction, then left without another glance. The door clicked shut, and the quiet that followed was absolute. I walked through every room slowly, touching the things that still carried echoes of my life. The chipped window frame I'd fixed one winter, the corner of the kitchen where laughter used to live. It didn't hurt anymore. It just was. When I finally stepped outside, the sun had dipped low, painting the house in amber light. I locked the door behind me, not as a gesture of possession, but of closure. This house had been my cage, my battlefield, and my proof. But as I stood on the porch, breathing in the evening air, I realized it no longer defined me. I didn't need to win the house to win myself back. I looked up at the sky, calm and wide and endless. "Thank you," I whispered, to no one in particular, maybe to life itself, for teaching me that silence, when earned, can speak louder than any apology. Then I turned, walked down the steps, and didn't look back. The apology never came. I waited for it once. Maybe not in words, but in gestures, in small acknowledgments that they had wronged me. But days turned to weeks, and silence stretched longer than the distance between us. My parents called occasionally, speaking as if nothing had happened. My mother's tone was careful, fragile. She asked about my work, the weather, whether I was eating well. My father spoke rarely, his pride still guarding every word. They talked around the past like it was a sleeping animal that might wake if touched. I stopped expecting remorse. Somewhere between all the pain and the courtroom victory, I realized I didn't need it. One Saturday morning, I started painting the walls of the house. White, then pale sage in the kitchen, soft amber in the hallway. With each stroke, I felt like I was erasing more than color. I was cleansing years of invisible bruises left by neglect and favoritism. Sometimes, I caught myself remembering the way my sister laughed when my father praised her for things I quietly did behind the scenes. The nights I stayed up balancing their bills, the mornings I felt invisible even under the same roof. Those memories came like ghosts, but I didn't chase them away. I let them drift through and dissolve. Healing, I learned, wasn't about forgetting. It was about learning to live beside what hurt without letting it define you. I replaced the old curtains with sheer ones that let in the morning light. I moved the furniture around until the space finally felt like mine. Every creak in the floor, every imperfection in the wall became part of my story, not theirs. Sometimes, when I made tea in the quiet kitchen, I'd imagine what it would have been like if they had said the words I once craved. We were wrong. Maybe it would have felt nice. But I suspect it wouldn't have changed much. The real change had already happened. In me. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't a gift for the people who hurt you. It's something you give yourself so you can finally stop carrying them. One evening, I sat on the porch and watched the sun dip behind the trees. A car passed by slowly, my parents' old sedan. It didn't stop, but I saw my mother glance toward the house as they drove past. That tiny motion, that quiet, almost invisible acknowledgement, was enough. I smiled. Not because they'd finally understood, but because I no longer needed them to. Inside, I placed a single photo on the mantel. Just me this time, standing under the same roof that once made me feel like a stranger. The smile in that photo wasn't forced. It wasn't seeking approval. It was simply free. I turned off the lights and whispered softly to the room, "We're okay now." And for the first time in years, I truly was. Months passed, and the house began to feel alive again. Not haunted by old memories, but humming softly with new ones. I had stopped calling it the house. Now, when I spoke about it, I called it home. The word no longer carried pain. It carried purpose. The idea came to me one morning as sunlight streamed through the studio room. I had laid out my paints and canvases again, something I hadn't done in years. As I brushed color onto the blank canvas, I realized how deeply I wanted this place to mean something more than just square footage or family history. I wanted it to be a beginning, for someone else too. So I turned the house into something new. The guest rooms became small workspaces, bright and open. I added a sign near the entrance that read, "Hearthlight Studio, a place to start over." Women from around town began visiting. Single mothers, divorcees, young artists, all searching for their own way back to themselves. They'd come to paint, write, design, or simply to breathe. The first time one of them told me, "This place feels safe," my throat tightened, because that was all I ever wanted. To feel safe, seen and enough. The rooms that once echoed with judgment now filled with laughter, music and quiet creation. The kitchen table, once the stage of my humiliation, now hosted coffee mugs, sketchbooks, and late-night talks about starting again. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was renewal. Sometimes I'd stand by the front door, the same one I once whispered over in defiance, and watch the women arrive. Nervous at first, then slowly smiling, lighter with each visit. I'd remember the version of me who once packed her things in silence, believing she had lost everything. She hadn't lost. She was simply being redirected. My parents never came back. My sister moved to another city, married someone new, and we kept our distance, but I didn't hold bitterness anymore. What once burned in me now glowed, steady, warm. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't forgetting what happened. It's choosing not to live there anymore. One evening, after the last guest had left, I sat by the living room window with a cup of tea. The same sunlight that once revealed dust and grief now spilled across fresh flowers and open sketchbooks. The house breathed with me, slower, easier. As the sky turned amber, I thought about everything that had changed. This home, once stolen, once fought for, had finally become what it was always meant to be, a place of belonging. And as I looked around, a quiet smile found me. "They once told me this wasn't my home," I said softly, my voice steady and sure. "Now, it's where I help others find theirs." The wind outside stirred, gentle and kind, carrying that truth through the open windows. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a guest in my own story. I felt like its author.